"Ma'am, Section 7-4, it's a trap." The voice was low, quiet, but sharp as a blade. Alexis Thorne, CEO of Thorne Global and the most powerful woman on the 58th floor of Manhattan's glass fortress, paused mid-signature. The gold-tipped Mont Blanc pen she held hovered just inches from sealing the largest merger of her career, a $3 billion deal that could transform her company or dismantle it entirely. The whisper had come from the shadows, from the corner of the room where no one had been paying attention. Jack Rourke stood there in a gray maintenance uniform, a wrench in one hand, a badge clipped to his chest. The janitor. Or so everyone assumed. Silence fell like a curtain. "I'm sorry," Alexis asked without looking up her tone, calm but cutting. She didn't repeat herself. She never needed to. Jack held his ground. He didn't flinch. His voice had already done what few had dared in that room stop Alexis Thorne in her tracks. "Is this some kind of prank?" snapped Edward Marston, the CFO and her closest confidant. "Who the hell let this guy in here during the signing, security?" he barked. "Get this janitor out of the boardroom. Now." "Wait," Alexis said quietly, raising her hand. Her eyes were now locked on Jack. "You. Say that again." Jack's throat tightened. Section 7.4 of the merger contract. It includes a clause that indirectly hands over executive control. You may not have seen Appendix C. There it was again. Calm, direct, and impossible to ignore. Edward stormed toward him, nostrils flaring. "This is absurd. Alexis, he's talking nonsense. This is harassment." But Alexis didn't budge. She capped her pen, closed the contract slowly, and stepped away from the table. 3 strides brought her face to face with the janitor who had just put a $3 billion signature on hold. "Who are you?" she said softly. "And why should I believe a man holding a wrench over a room full of lawyers?" Jack met her eyes, steady as stone. "I'm Jack Rourke. I used to be a finance student at NYU before life. Changed plans. I'm not asking for anything. But if you sign that paper without checking Section 7.4, you'll lose everything your father built." "NYU," Edward scoffed. "A janitor from NYU? How poetic." Jack ignored him. His eyes never left Alexis. "They're playing a game," he said. "And you're the piece they don't think will notice." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone felt it. "Everyone out," Alexis said suddenly. "Alexis," Edward began. "I said out." Her voice left no room for discussion. 30 minutes later, the room was empty except for 2 people. Jack stood by the edge of the conference table, wrench still in hand like a soldier holding a fading shield. Alexis sat at the head of the table, flipping through the contract now with fresh eyes and a sense of suspicion growing by the second. "How did you know?" she asked. "I've written contracts like this before," Jack said quietly. "Before the world decided I was better at fixing elevators." She studied him. "Why today? Why this moment? What made you think it was worth the risk?" Jack shrugged. "Better to lose a job than watch someone walk blindfolded into a $3 billion trap. You understand that if you're wrong, this isn't just a mistake. It's sabotage." "I understand." Alexis rose, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan stretched beneath her like a field of steel and ambition. The sun was starting to set, casting golden fire across Central Park. "Do you have proof?" she asked. "Not enough for court, but enough to make you second-guess the people closest to you." She turned slightly. Edward Jack didn't answer. Another long pause. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m., floor 56, she said without turning. "Bring whatever you have. If I think this is a stunt, you'll fire me." "No," she said, finally facing him. Her eyes were ice. "I'll make sure you never work in a single corporate building in this country again." Jack nodded. "That's fair." Alexis stepped toward the door. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor. Just as her hand touched the doorknob, she paused and spoke without looking back. "Only 2 kinds of men interrupt a $3 billion signing. Fools, or men who've already lost too much to be afraid." Jack said nothing, but his silence carried more weight than any speech. He was not afraid. That night, in a narrow apartment in Brooklyn, Jack sat beside his 6-year-old daughter Lily. She was coloring in a book with broken crayons and humming to herself under the warm glow of a flickering lamp. "Daddy, why are you so quiet?" Lily asked, her eyes bright. Jack smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because I might have changed someone's life today." "Did you fix something?" He chuckled. "Maybe. But not a pipe or a door this time." "Then what?" "Maybe. A destiny." Lily tilted her head, not quite understanding, but she hugged her dad anyway and whispered, "You're the best fixer in the whole wide world, Daddy." And Jack Rourke, once a rising star in finance, now a man with grease-stained hands and a little girl who called him Hero, knew in that moment that tomorrow everything might change. And he was ready. At precisely 8:00 a.m., the elevator doors slid open to the 56th floor, a level few employees at Thorn Global ever saw unless they wore a tailored suit and had a 7-figure portfolio. Jack Rourke stepped out in the same gray work uniform he wore the day before. No suit, no tie, just clean boots and a man's sense of purpose. Alexis Thorn was already waiting in the executive conference room alone, dressed in a sleek navy pantsuit. Her eyes met Jack's as he entered. Cool, cautious, but undeniably curious. "You're punctual," she said without looking up from the tablet in her hands. Jack smiled faintly. "It's the one thing I never had to unlearn." She gestured toward the seat across from her. "Sit. And impress me." Jack opened his worn-out backpack and pulled out a small folder of printed documents. "I didn't bring fancy presentations or color-coded charts," he said. "Just this, and maybe a little common sense." Alexis arched a brow. "Common sense doesn't usually hold up in billion-dollar deals." "That's the problem," Jack replied calmly. "People think complexity equals intelligence, but the smartest lies are hidden in simple truths." She leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on." Jack flipped open the first page. "Here's the original contract you were shown. And here's the modified version that was buried in the encrypted appendix, the one most people don't even realize exists unless they're trained to see anomalies." He pointed to a paragraph buried in Section 7.4. "This clause redirects executive voting power to a shell entity, Thorn Strategic Holdings. On paper, you keep 65% ownership, but post-merger control shifts to the board of that subsidiary, which according to registration records doesn't include your name at all." Alexis narrowed her eyes, lips pressed tight. "And who does it include?" "3 names," Jack replied. 2 directors from Fusion Tech, and Edward Marston." For a brief moment the room seemed to contract like the oxygen had been pulled out. Alexis said nothing. Her fingers slowly curled around the edge of the table. "I cross-checked filings with the SEC and Delaware's registry," Jack continued. "Thorn Strategic Holdings is a paper company. It was created 6 weeks ago with no active operations, no employees, and only 1 bank account in the Cayman Islands." Her voice was a whisper now. "Edward's signature is on the trust documents." Jack nodded, twice. Alexis closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were colder, sharper. "He's been by my side for 15 years. He held my father's hand when he passed. He stood next to me when the board voted me CEO." She looked away. "I used to think loyalty was priceless, but maybe betrayal is just more affordable." Jack was silent. Sometimes the deepest wounds didn't need commentary, only air to breathe. "Why didn't I see this?" Alexis murmured more to herself. "Because people like Edward know exactly how to wear trust like a tailored suit," Jack said gently. "They iron the lies until the creases disappear." She looked up at him. There was a flicker of something not yet trust, but the beginning of belief. "And you," she said, "what's your angle in all this? What does the janitor gain from exposing a corporate coup?" Jack smiled, and it wasn't bitter. Just tired. I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid to lose again. But watching someone walk off a cliff when you know there's a way back, that's the kind of regret that never goes quiet. Alexis stared at him for a long time. You're not just a janitor. No, he said simply. But I'm also not trying to be a hero. I'm just someone who used to matter, and now I fix broken things for a living. Alexis stood up, walked to the window. The morning sun poured into the room, catching the gold in her hair, painting half her face in light and the other half in shadow. She spoke without turning. The world's full of people who pretend they care, and then once in a while someone who actually does walks in holding a wrench. Jack let out a breath. That line, he would carry it with him for a long time. Where do we go from here? He asked. Alexis turned now fully composed CEO armor back in place. We investigate deeper, quietly. No alerts, no confrontation. Not yet. Jack nodded. I can help, but we'll need access to Edward's shared drive meeting notes and someone inside legal who isn't already bought. I know someone, she said, but we'll need to bring them in carefully. She picked up the folder, closed it, then looked at Jack. Today, you reminded me of something I forgot. What's that? That integrity isn't dead. It just tends to work the night shift. Jack smiled. You'll need to be careful. Edward's not stupid. He'll sense you're stalling. Then let him, she said. The most dangerous thing a liar can do is assume they've already won. Later that day, back in the janitor's locker room, Jack leaned against a battered metal cabinet. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally stepping back into a world he thought he'd left behind. His friend Ray, another longtime maintenance guy, watched him with curiosity. You look like a man who just walked out of a lion's den. I might have, Jack replied. What did you do this time? Fix another CEO's coffee machine. Jack chuckled under his breath. No, he said. This time I might have fixed her future. Ray raised a brow. You always were too smart for this job. Jack paused. No, he said quietly. This job saved me. But maybe it's time I remember who I used to be. Outside the service hallway, people in suits walked past Jack like he was invisible. But something had shifted in him and in the air. For the first time in years, Jack Rourke wasn't just mopping up after power. He was walking straight into it. By Tuesday afternoon, Alexis Thorne was no longer reading documents, she was dissecting them. Every comma, every footnote, every legal reference in the Fusion Tech merger contract was now a battlefield. Her once impenetrable confidence had shifted into focused paranoia, not born of weakness, but of awakening. She sat alone in her private office, floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden rays across the polished stone. The city stretched out like a chessboard, and for the first time she wasn't sure which pieces were still hers. Her phone buzzed. A message from Edward. Meeting at 4 p.m. Final review. I'll bring the updated NDA. Let's wrap this. Alexis stared at the text. Her thumbs hovered, then stopped. She locked the screen without replying. Across the building in the operations wing, Jack Rourke stood in a dusty utility closet that now doubled as his war room. On a small folding table, pages were spread out like maps in a general's tent. Circles, arrows, sticky notes, evidence and intuition laid side by side. Beside him, a pot of burnt coffee steamed quietly. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. The kind of real that gets things done. A quiet knock startled him. He opened the door to see a woman in a gray blazer, sharp eyes behind thin-framed glasses. She looked like someone who had spent a decade filing paperwork for people who never said, "Thank you." "You're Jack?" she asked. "Depends," Jack said. "You the IRS." She smirked. "Name's Natalie Cho. Alexis said you'd explain. Said I was the only lawyer in the building who still sleeps at night." Jack stepped aside. "Then you're exactly who we need." Natalie walked in and looked around at the mess. "This is your strategy room. I've worked with Les," Jack said, handing her a copy of the modified Appendix C. Within minutes, Natalie's quiet professionalism turned into disbelief. "This isn't a merger," she muttered. "This is a silent coup." "Exactly," Jack replied. "And it's been hiding in plain sight." Her fingers traced a paragraph. "This phrasing here. I've seen Edward use this language before. He calls it corporate fog, makes everything look official while blurring the truth." Jack leaned in. "Can you verify if it holds up in court?" Natalie closed the folder slowly. "If what I'm seeing is real," she said, "then not only is Edward committing fraud, he's doing it with surgical precision. And unless we stop it, Alexis will be signing away her company in less than 72 hours. Jack nodded. "Then we don't have much time." Later that evening, Alexis sat in the rooftop garden of the Thorne building, her place of refuge since her father passed. The skyline blinked around her like watchful eyes. But tonight, none of them felt safe. Jack approached quietly, a folder in hand. She didn't turn to look at him, but her voice was waiting. "My father used to say, 'The first betrayal always comes with a handshake.'" Jack sat beside her. He was a wise man. He built this company from nothing. 2 desks, a fax machine, and a coffee pot that never worked. When he died, I swore I'd protect his legacy. Jack handed her the folder. "Then you're going to have to fight for it." She opened it and saw the latest findings, Natalie's legal annotations, corporate registration details, the ownership structure of the Cayman shell. "What's this?" she whispered, pointing at a wire transfer dated just 2 weeks ago. $2.7 million from Fusion Tech's integration fund to a private trust. "Guess whose name is on it, Edward?" she said flatly. Jack nodded. Twice. She closed the folder. "You know what hurts the most?" she asked, voice breaking slightly. "It's not the betrayal. It's how easy I made it for him. How completely I believed." Jack said softly, "That's not your failure, Alexis. That's your strength. Trust is the currency of leadership. Without it, you're not a CEO, you're just a tyrant with a desk." Alexis turned to him. "What about you, Jack? Who betrayed you?" He hesitated. The pause was short but heavy. "A friend," he finally said. "A long time ago. We were college roommates. Built a startup together. I trusted him to handle our first investor round. He disappeared with everything, including my name, on the paperwork. When it collapsed, so did my future." She looked at him, really looked at him. "So that's why you're here. You know what it feels like when the floor disappears beneath you." Jack nodded. "And I don't want anyone else to fall through that hole." A moment of silence passed, full of unspoken truths. Alexis stood and faced the city. "We're going to need more than this to take him down." "Then I'll find it." She turned, eyes locked with his. "Why you, Jack? Why risk your job, maybe your future, for someone like me?" He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Because someone once saw potential in me when I was invisible to the world, and I never got to pay that forward until now." She looked away, but he saw the way her shoulders softened. "You still have the clearance badge I gave you." He pulled it from his pocket. "Haven't let it out of my sight." "Good. Because tomorrow we take this deeper. Fusion Tech's server logs, board meeting recordings, and Edward's travel data. I want everything." Jack nodded. "You'll have it." As he turned to leave, she called out quietly, "Jack." He stopped. "You're not invisible anymore." Jack paused, then gave a quiet nod, and for the first time in years he felt seen. Not for his uniform, not for his past, but for his integrity. That night, Jack lay on the couch in his small apartment, Lily curled up beside him, fast asleep. Her breathing was soft, rhythmic, the sound of safety. He watched the ceiling as streetlight shadows danced across it. Tomorrow would bring risk, exposure, maybe loss. But for the first time in years, Jack Rourke had a mission, a reason to stand taller, a chance not just to fix what was broken but to protect something worth keeping whole. And he would not fail. Not again. The next morning, the Thorne Global building buzzed like nothing had changed. Executive assistants tapped on keyboards. Elevator chimes rang like digital lullabies. People passed one another in pressed suits, armed with coffee and confidence. But somewhere in the heart of the building, something had cracked a hairline fracture in the perfect glass of power, and Jack Rourke was quietly following that crack all the way to its source. At 7:48 a.m., Jack walked into the secured records archive on the 41st floor. He wore a visitor badge and carried a clipboard, just another maintenance man doing a digital integrity inspection, a fake work order Natalie had approved through Alexis's personal authorization. The archive was cold and quiet, humming with machines and the soft whir of cooling fans. Servers lined the walls like silent sentinels. Jack moved with careful steps, following the inventory tags Alexis had given him. Server 12A, the oldest unit, least updated, most overlooked. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket, not company-issued but custom encrypted by Natalie the night before. Jack inserted it into the rear port, watching the transfer bar crawl upward. Minutes passed. Then something strange appeared. A folder labeled Confroom Echo. Jack clicked it open. Dozens of audio files, timestamps, meeting IDs. He hesitated, then opened the most recent one. A voice, crisp, familiar. Edward Marston. She's still stalling. We need to push the vote. If she resists, we start the mental health campaign. That board loves a martyr but fears instability even more. Jack's grip tightened on the mouse. Another voice responded. One Jack didn't recognize. And the janitor, Edward, scoffed. I'm looking into him. No one in maintenance is that articulate. I want his file scrubbed. If he shows up again, we bury him in HR red tape. The file ended. Jack sat in the dark, surrounded by humming servers and digital ghosts. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he clicked copy all and slipped the drive into his pocket. They weren't just stealing Alexis's company. They were preparing to destroy her and him. An hour later, Jack entered Alexis's office without knocking. She was mid-call, but when she saw his face, she ended it with a single, "We'll talk later." "What did you find?" she asked. Jack placed the USB drive on her desk. They've been recording boardroom conversations for months, planning not just the merger, but how to undermine you if you push back. She plugged it into her laptop. The first few seconds of the Edward recording played. She closed her eyes, jaw tightening. "I trusted him with my father's legacy," she said softly. Jack said, "People like Edward don't steal companies. They steal trust. Because once that's gone, everything else falls like glass." She opened her eyes and stared at the skyline beyond her window. "We need a plan." "We already have one," Jack replied. "But first, we need to test who's truly with you." That afternoon, Alexis called an impromptu integration review with 3 senior executives, including Joanna Whitman, her longtime chief of staff. They met in a side conference room with no windows, no recordings. "I've been reviewing certain discrepancies," Alexis began, her voice measured, "and I need your full transparency." Joanna, a poised woman in her 40s, folded her hands calmly. "Of course. Someone's been rerouting communications, filtering what I see. I need to know who's been involved in data authorization for Appendix C." Joanna didn't flinch. "Everything goes through Edward." And you, Joanna, tilted her head slightly. "I've always trusted Edward. You told me to." The room grew still. Jack, seated in the corner pretending to take notes, said quietly, "Trust doesn't mean silence." Joanna turned to him, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me. You've seen the red flags. You just didn't speak up. That's not loyalty. That's complicity." Alexis didn't stop him. She was watching Joanna now, not with suspicion but with final clarity. "I've been blind," Alexis said. "But that ends today." Joanna stood, voice cool. "Are you accusing me of something?" Alexis met her gaze. "I'm asking if you remember who you were before the power made you forget." Joanna didn't answer. She just left. Later, in Alexis's office, Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Alexis poured herself a glass of water but didn't drink it. She was part of it, she said quietly. I saw it in her eyes. You don't need everyone, Jack replied. Just the right ones. She looked at him, her expression unguarded. You make it sound simple. It's not, he said, but it's honest. And that's rare up here. Why do you talk like that? She asked suddenly. Like you're both outside the system and still care about fixing it. Jack thought for a moment, then shrugged. Because some of us were never supposed to be on the outside to begin with. Her eyes softened just slightly. You're not like the others, she said. Neither are you, he replied. They stood there in silence for a moment. Two people from opposite worlds drawn together, not by romance, not yet, but by something deeper recognition. The kind you only feel when someone sees through your armor. And stays. That night, Jack returned home to find Lily asleep on the couch surrounded by her drawings. One of them was of him holding a big shield, standing between two people and a monster with red eyes. He smiled. Maybe she didn't know exactly what he was doing, but somehow, she knew who he was. He kissed her forehead gently and whispered, Almost there, kiddo. In his chest, a storm was growing, not of fear, of purpose. And in the silence of that tiny apartment, Jack Rourke made a promise to Alexis, to Lily, and to the version of himself he thought he had lost. I won't stop until the truth has a name again. Yours. It was nearly midnight when Alexis unlocked the archive room on the 43rd floor. The building was a skeleton of itself after dark, empty corridors, flickering exit signs, the distant hum of air conditioning systems humming like forgotten lullabies. But in her chest, Alexis Thorne felt no quiet. She hadn't slept, couldn't, not after what Jack had uncovered, not after what she had begun to feel pressing against her walls of logic, the possibility that Edward, her oldest friend, her father's chosen ally, had been playing her for a fool. She needed proof, not theory, not instinct, evidence, and that's why she was here with the stolen master keycard gloves and a heart beating so loudly it nearly echoed. Behind her, Jack moved with quiet precision. He carried a laptop and a small hard drive. The two of them were a picture no one could have imagined a week ago, the billionaire CEO and the janitor with a past. Server access is limited to 30 minutes, Alexis whispered. After that, the backup system flags the intrusion. 30 minutes is a lifetime when you know what you're looking for, Jack murmured. Let's dance. Within minutes, they were deep inside Edward Marston's personal folder tucked behind layers of encrypted subdirectories with names like budget drafts and vendor files. But the truth never hides forever. Here, Jack said, eyes scanning the screen. Fusion Tech merger pre-final revision. Let's see what our friend left behind. What appeared next stopped Alexis cold. Two versions of the merger document, one with her company retaining 65% voting rights. The other, the one not submitted to the board, left her with just 15%. It's worse than we thought, Jack said. This version lists Thorne Global as the junior partner post-merger. Not equal, subordinate. Alexis's voice was hollow, but that would mean, he's not merging with you, Jack said quietly. He's replacing you. She sank into the chair beside him, her face pale, unreadable. The screen's cold blue light reflected off her cheekbones like armor cracking. He was at my father's funeral, she whispered. He held my hand when we buried the man who built this company from nothing. And now he's selling off the bones while smiling in my face. Jack didn't speak. Some wounds needed space before words could land without breaking something sacred. A few more clicks and Jack found a folder labeled Sophia. He opened it. Dozens of emails. Messages marked confidential. Photos. One video file. Who's Sophia? Jack asked, frowning. Alexis leaned in. Her breath caught. That's Sophia Delgado, she said. My ex-CMO. She left 2 years ago after a disagreement over company ethics. What kind of disagreement? She wanted to license our tech to a private defense firm. I said no. She resigned the next week. Jack clicked on the video file. It opened to a grainy boardroom recording. Edward sat across from Sophia. Alexis will sign it, Sophia said. She trusts you more than she trusts herself. Edward smirked. Then she's earned what's coming. The audio continued revealing timelines, exit strategies, bank transfers to offshore accounts. Their voices were casual, cold, clinical, like butchers discussing how to carve up a legacy. Alexis watched in silence, not blinking, not breathing. When the video ended, she stood up, walked to the far side of the room and pressed her hand flat against the glass window. Below, the lights of Manhattan glittered like stars caught in a steel web. My father once told me, she said, that the real enemy is never the competitor across the table. It's the friend sitting beside you with a knife behind their back. Jack stepped closer. You don't have to carry this alone. She turned to him. You don't understand. I've only carried it alone. Since the day he died, every decision, every deal, every fight I've made it solo because I thought I had Edward watching my blind spot. Her voice cracked, but he was aiming for it instead. Jack reached into his jacket and handed her a printed photo, one he'd pulled from security footage. It showed Edward and Sophia in a cafe 2 blocks from the Thorne building, laughing, leaning close, passing a flash drive between them. The timestamp was just 5 days ago. Alexis took the photo, her hand trembling. This ends now, she said, her voice sharper than ever. Tomorrow morning we go to the board. Jack hesitated. Not yet. She looked at him. What do you mean we still don't have enough? They'll claim this is out of context forged, or worse, you being paranoid. We need a direct link to the fake contracts, and we need to catch Edward in the act. Alexis nodded slowly. You're right. So, what do we do? Jack stepped closer, voice low. We bait him. The next morning, Alexis walked into the executive breakfast with her usual composure. Edward stood to greet her, smiling as always. You look well rested, he said, handing her a glass of grapefruit juice. Funny, she replied, I slept like someone with nothing to hide. He laughed. That's the best kind of sleep. I reviewed the merger file again last night, she added casually, and I had some questions. Think you can walk me through section 7.4 again? Edward blinked. Just briefly, but it was enough. Of course, he said smoothly. Let's set a time. How about tonight? Alexis said. Just you and me. No distractions. He hesitated, then nodded. Sure, tonight. Across the room, Jack watched from the service hallway. He saw Edward's jaw tighten, the flash of calculation in his eyes. The trap was set. Now they just had to wait. That night, Jack met Alexis outside her office. She handed him a small device. Voice-activated recorder. Plant it in the room before he arrives. Jack nodded. Are you ready? She asked. He looked at her not as a janitor, not even as a partner, but as someone who believed in her, ready to finish what they started. As Alexis stepped back into the lion's den, Jack disappeared into the shadows exactly where he was needed. Not to be seen, but to make sure everything else finally was. The Thorne Global Executive Lounge was quiet, dressed in muted lighting and too much marble. A decanter of rare scotch sat untouched on a walnut-side table, the kind of luxury that screamed legacy and whispered power. But tonight, it was not power that filled the room. It was strategy. Alexis Thorne sat at the far end of the room, her legs crossed, composed like a portrait. A sleek gray blazer over black silk. Hair tied back in a way that revealed both elegance and intent. She was the picture of calm, but beneath that exterior, the storm had already begun. The door opened. Edward Marston stepped in holding a leather folder and a smile that was too perfect. Apologies, he said, glancing at his watch. Traffic. No worries, Alexis said, gesturing to the seat across from her. We have time. He sat unfolding his folder with a rehearsed ease. So, section 7.4, you mentioned questions. Alexis leaned in slightly, eyes locking onto his. "Let's talk about control." Edward chuckled. "Control, Alexis. The structure ensures you retain operational autonomy. The board alignment is a formality." "Funny," she said softly, "because formality doesn't usually come with wire transfers to offshore accounts." For the first time, his smile twitched. "Just enough." "You've been digging." "I've been seeing," she corrected. "For the first time in years." He leaned back, arms casually crossed. "Careful, Alexis. Accusations like that, they echo." "So do betrayals," she replied. "Especially when they come from the only man my father told me never to question." Silence sat between them like a loaded gun. Across the hallway behind a maintenance panel Jack had quietly opened earlier that afternoon, a small voice-activated recorder was live capturing every syllable. Alexis kept going. "I want to hear it from you, Edward. Not the lawyers, not the ghosts in the files. You." Edward's voice dropped an octave. "Do you want the truth, or the version that lets you sleep tonight?" She didn't blink. "The truth." He stared at her, and then with a shrug of someone who believed he had already won, he gave it. "You lost the company the day you started running it with a conscience." Alexis blinked. Once. Slowly. Edward went on. "You turned down military contracts, refused the oil partnership in Dubai, and spent half our capital funding clean tech startups that won't break even until 2030. He leaned forward, voice tightening. "You're not a CEO, Alexis. You're a sentimentality machine. This company needs a shark, and I'm just giving the board what they're too polite to ask for out loud. A hostile takeover," she said low and cold. "A rescue," he corrected. "From your ideals." He stood now, closing the folder. "And when this merger goes through, I'll give you a generous exit package. Private island board, title The Illusion of Grace." Alexis rose too, but her eyes didn't rise. They ignited. "You mistook kindness for weakness. That's your first mistake." "And the second?" Edward asked. She stepped closer than she'd ever dared. "Thinking I'd let my father's legacy rot while you play king in a castle you didn't build." Edward's jaw clenched, but before he could speak again the door opened. Jack stepped inside. Quiet. Calm. And holding the recording device in his hand. "Hi, Edward," Jack said. "Hope you don't mind I caught the whole performance. Oscar-worthy, really." Edward blinked. "You Janitor, remember?" Jack smiled. "We're great at slipping into places unnoticed. It's kind of our thing." Alexis Edward turned eyes wide now, panic beginning to crack through his practiced control. "You can't. This isn't legal. This." "Oh, it's admissible." Natalie Cho's voice came from the doorway as she stepped in. "Especially when it's part of an internal investigation authorized by the CEO." She held a file in one hand. "Plus, your email authorization for the Fusion Tech wire transfer, that sealed it." Edward spun, now surrounded. "I built this company," he snapped. "I carried it through 3 recessions." "Where were you when we needed to survive?" "I was remembering who we are," Alexis said, "and making sure we didn't become what we fought to replace." Edward stood frozen, breathing hard, and in that moment, stripped of his titles and tactics, he looked small. Smaller than the legacy he tried to steal. Security appeared behind him. Quiet. Professional. Alexis nodded once. Edward didn't resist. He just walked past her eyes, full of a venom that couldn't reach her anymore, and then he was gone. Outside, Alexis walked to the empty rooftop where the wind caught the edges of her coat. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just stood there, a woman at the center of a storm she'd finally stopped. Jack joined her a moment later. "I'm sorry," he said. She shook her head. "No, don't be. You didn't break this. You just turned on the light." They stood in silence, city lights flickering below. "Do you think it's possible," she asked suddenly, "to rebuild something from the very bones it was betrayed?" And Jack looked out at the skyline. "Only if the bones are still honest." She turned to him. "And do you think I am?" He held her gaze. "I think you're the only person in this building brave enough to bleed for what's right." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She didn't need them. The strength was in her standing. "Then help me," she said, "not just to survive this, but to build something better." Jack nodded. "I will. Not because I need to be saved, but because you were never broken." Jack finished, only buried, and there, under the cold stars and warm promise of something new, Alexis Thorne took the first breath of a world no longer chained by silence. She was no longer alone. For the first time in months, sunlight poured into Alexis's office, unfiltered, golden alive. The blinds were wide open. The windows, usually coated with the frost of detachment, now gleamed with the promise of something earned, not inherited. She stood in front of the massive glass wall holding a cup of black coffee. No makeup, no earrings, just Alexis Thorne, raw, real, and ready. Behind her, Jack Rourke stepped in his boots, making that soft, recognizable thud against the polished floor. "You're early," she said without turning. "You're glowing," he replied. She looked over her shoulder. "I fired my facialist. Turns out truth works better than serums." Jack chuckled and leaned against the edge of the desk. "Board's meeting in 30. You ready for that circus? I was born in that circus," she said. "Today, I take back the tent." He studied her for a long second, then said quietly, "Alexis, you don't have to do it all the way your father did, or the way Edward tried to make you believe you had to." She turned to face him fully. "You're right, my father built this company on grit. Edward tried to hijack it with greed. But I think I'll rebuild it with grace." Jack smiled. "That's a better foundation." Just then, Lily peeked through the door, clutching a folded piece of paper. "Miss Alexis," she whispered. Alexis smiled warmly and walked over. "Good morning, sweetheart." Lily handed her the paper. "I drew this for you." On the page was a childlike sketch of Alexis in a superhero cape standing between tall buildings holding a shield with a heart on it. Jack was beside her, a toolbox in one hand, Lily in the other. Alexis knelt down and whispered, "Do I get to keep this?" Lily nodded. "Heroes don't wear masks. They wear kindness." Alexis blinked hard. "You're going to change the world someday, Lily." "No, the little girl said you already are." 30 minutes later, Alexis entered the boardroom. It was a chamber of power-long mahogany table leather chairs and the usual suspects wearing tailored suits and skeptical smiles. She didn't bring slides, or graphs, or a lawyer. She brought the truth. "Before we begin," Alexis said, standing at the head of the table, "let me say something very uncorporate." She looked around at the faces she'd once trusted without question. "I failed you," she said. "Not in numbers, not in revenue, but in vision. I allowed a culture to form that valued loyalty to individuals over loyalty to principles. I let relationships blind me to rot. But that ends today." Murmurs rippled. She continued, voice steady. "Edward Marston is no longer with this company. The evidence of his actions is with legal and will cooperate fully with authorities." Alexis, one board member, started, but she raised her hand. "I'm not here to defend my crown. I'm here to rebuild the kingdom, and that means cleaning house not just in our executive suite, but in our soul." She took a breath. "I will be proposing a new oversight committee with real transparency. Employees will have voting representation on environmental decisions. Bonuses will be tied to values, not just quarterly gains. And starting today, janitorial staff, cafeteria workers, and every often forgotten hand that holds this place together will be included in the company's annual equity program." The room went still. Jack stood in the back, arms crossed, watching a woman reclaim her empire not with fire, but with light. "This isn't about PR," she finished. "It's about legacy. Mine and yours. We get to decide what we leave behind." A pause. Then one board member, the oldest, Mr. Leland, spoke. "Your father once told me, when the winds shift, only the rooted survive. Alexis. Today, you proved you're rooted in something far deeper than profit. She nodded once. The vote was unanimous. Later in the elevator, Alexis stood beside Jack holding a small box of her father's old cufflinks, ones she had retrieved from his private drawer, a symbol of the weight now passed on. "I've spent years trying to live up to a name," she said. "Turns out the name needed me to rewrite its meaning." Jack looked at her. "You didn't rewrite it, you redeemed it." She turned to him, then reached into her blazer pocket and handed him a small envelope. "What's this, your official title?" she said with a smirk. He opened it. "Director of Integrity and Innovation." Jack laughed. "Is that even a real department?" "It is now," she said. "You built it. You just didn't know." He shook his head. "I don't have an MBA, you know." "Good," she replied, "because I don't want a resume. I want a compass." That evening, the rooftop garden glowed with soft lanterns and strings of light. Alexis, Jack, and Lily sat on a picnic blanket overlooking the skyline, eating takeout from paper containers. "Do billionaires usually eat noodles out of a box?" Jack teased. Alexis grinned. "Only the ones who remember what it's like to be hungry." Lily leaned against Jack's side, half asleep. "You know he said you didn't have to offer me a job." "I didn't," she said. "I offered you a place." He looked at her, his voice quieter. "You gave me more than that. You gave me a reason to show up again." She met his gaze, and in it there was no distance anymore. Just two souls rebuilt from ruin, learning how to hold hope in their hands without breaking it. "Jack," she whispered. "Yeah, promise me something. Anything. That when this world gets loud again, when the glass towers start to shake, you'll remind me who I am." He didn't hesitate. Every single time. And as the city hummed beneath them, two hearts once shattered by betrayal and silence began to beat not in fear, but in rhythm. Together. It had been 2 weeks since the boardroom fell silent, since Edward Marston had been walked out under the dim weight of consequences. And in that time, something strange had begun to bloom at Thorn Global. Not profit, though numbers were rising. Not headlines, though the press was cautiously optimistic. It was trust. A quiet, tender trust that echoed through every hallway and open-door meeting. Employees smiled more. People stayed late not out of fear, but belief. Even the coffee tasted better. But for Jack Rourke and Alexis Thorne, something deeper stirred, unspoken, undefined. The space between them had always been charged. First with tension, then with respect, and now something warmer, something neither of them quite dared to name. Yet. It started on a Saturday morning. Jack was late. He never was. Alexis stood outside a quiet community center in Brooklyn, checking her watch, scanning for his rugged frame through the crowd of volunteers. Lily beside her held a box of crayons and construction paper. Today was Letters of Kindness, a program Alexis had quietly sponsored under Lily's suggestion. "Maybe he got lost," Alexis offered gently. Lily shook her head. "Daddy doesn't get lost. He just gets caught." Alexis raised an eyebrow. "Caught?" Lily shrugged. "In his thoughts. Sometimes they're heavier than tools." Before Alexis could respond, Jack came jogging down the sidewalk, shirt slightly wrinkled, breath short. "I'm late," he panted, but alive. "You had me worried," Alexis said, half teasing, half serious. Jack looked at her, something flickering in his gaze. "Yeah, I've been a little tangled." They walked inside. Children were already seated, coloring notes for strangers, firefighters, nurses, even bus drivers. Lily ran ahead, slipping into the rhythm. Jack stayed close to Alexis. She glanced at him. "You okay?" He hesitated. Then, "You ever feel like you've been holding your breath for 10 years? And suddenly you don't know what to do with the air?" Her voice softened. "All the time." He nodded, eyes scanning the room. Back then, when Lily's mom left, I told myself I didn't deserve joy if I couldn't even keep my family whole. Jack. But lately, he continued. I keep hearing this small voice like a whisper under everything." He looked at her vulnerability etched across his usually steady expression. "And it says, what if you do deserve a second chance?" Alexis didn't speak. She just reached for a folded letter from the pile beside her and placed it in his hand. It was from a child. The handwriting was crooked. The message simple. "Dear stranger, I don't know you, but I believe in you. Please don't give up. Grace, age 7. Jack blinked hard. "That letter wasn't for me," he whispered. "Yes, it was," she said. "All of them are. For all of us." Later that afternoon, they walked the long way back toward the train station. The air was crisp and the kind that hinted at autumn, but still carried the warmth of summer's memory. They stopped at a small park bench beneath a canopy of orange trees. "Can I ask you something?" Alexis said. "Sure. Why haven't you kissed me?" Jack's head snapped toward her, startled. She wasn't smirking, wasn't teasing. She was just asking. Jack exhaled slowly. "Because I didn't want to make something sacred feel impulsive." She nodded. "And if I told you I've been waiting for something that didn't feel like a transaction or a power play, I'd believe you," he said. A pause, the kind that holds history in its silence. Then Jack said quietly, "Truth is, I think I've loved you longer than I realized." It wasn't a moment. It was a build, a slow, quiet unfolding. She turned toward him, voice steady. Then, "Let's unfold. Slowly, honestly, without hiding." He reached for her hand, and in that moment, no dramatic music, no sweeping camera pan. Just two people on a bench under a whispering tree. Something finally exhaled between them. Not fireworks. Peace. The next day, Alexis took Jack and Lily to a secret place. Her childhood lake house hidden 3 hours north where cell reception was spotty, but the memories came in strong. The cabin was modest, weather-worn, honest. Lily ran to the dock shrieking with laughter at the frogs. Jack carried the bags inside. Alexis stood at the edge of the water, shoes off, toes in the cold. "You used to come here with your dad?" Jack asked from behind her. She nodded. "Every summer. It was the only place he ever laughed." Jack glanced around. "He'd be proud of you, you know." "No," she said softly. "He'd see me. And that's all I ever wanted." Jack placed a hand on her back, not to pull her close, not to claim anything, but simply to say, "I'm here." And for once, Alexis didn't feel like she had to carry everything alone. They stayed that night by the fire, Lily snoring in the back bedroom and the two of them watching the flames crackle. "I used to think broken things had no place in a world this sharp," Jack said. "But now, I think it's the cracks that let the light do its work." Alexis turned toward him. "You're not broken, Jack. You were just waiting for someone to stop looking through you and finally see you." He smiled, eyes shimmering. "I see you too." They didn't kiss. Not yet. Because some moments aren't about arrival. They're about recognition. Monday morning arrived with a crisp chill that hinted at fall curling under doors and nudging at collars. But inside the Thorn Global lobby, warmth pulsed in soft greetings, shared coffees, and the unmistakable buzz of a company that had survived its darkest storm and come out breathing. Jack stepped off the elevator holding Lily's forgotten lunchbox. She'd left it in Alexis's office during her very important meeting the day before a summit of stuffed animals and invisible tea. He grinned to himself. Life had taken on a rhythm. Not perfect, but possible. And for a man who had once believed he'd used up all his good chapters, that was everything. "Morning," Jack came Natalie's voice from reception. "You're glowing. I think it's just the lighting," he said. "No," she smiled. "It's the girl." Jack chuckled and made his way down the hallway toward Alexis's office. But before he could knock, he stopped. Her voice drifted through the door. Low, strained. "I understand. Yes. No, I appreciate the update. Just, please keep me posted." A beat of silence. Then, softer. "Thank you for telling me. Jack knocked gently and peeked in. Alexis was seated at her desk, hands still wrapped around the phone long after the call had ended. Her face was composed, too composed. "Hey," Jack said, holding up the lunchbox like a peace offering. "Forgotten fuel." She smiled faintly. "Thank you." But something in her didn't move. He stepped closer. "Bad news." She hesitated. Then, "It's about my mother." Jack blinked. "I thought you didn't." "I don't," she interrupted, then softened. "I mean, I haven't. Not in years." She stood walking slowly to the window. "I got a call from a palliative care center in Oregon. She was admitted 3 weeks ago under a different name. Terminal cancer, stage 4. Jack stepped beside her silent. "They found my contact on a letter in her belongings," she continued. "A letter she wrote, but never mailed. It was addressed to me. Dated 3 years ago. What did it say?" Alexis turned tears unshed but present. "I'm sorry for never learning how to love the kind of daughter who didn't need saving." Jack exhaled. "That's a lot." She nodded. "My mother left when I was 13. Said I reminded her too much of my father. Too sharp, too stubborn, too much. I never saw her again." A long silence stretched between them. "I spent most of my life thinking I was unlovable," she whispered. "That I had to earn affection. That I had to build an empire just to prove I was worth staying for." Jack's voice was soft. "You don't need to build anything else, Alexis. You're already enough." She looked at him, and in that gaze was a trembling bridge between girlhood wounds and the woman she'd fought to become. "She wants to see me," Alexis said. "Before she dies." Jack didn't answer right away, but then he said, "Then let's go." Alexis blinked. "What let's go?" he repeated. "Lily's off school Friday. We'll drive. Take a few days." "Jack, you don't have to do that. I know," he said. "That's why it matters." 3 days later, the three of them were on the road, the city slowly vanishing behind them like a fading storm cloud. Lily napped in the back seat with a crayon still tucked in her fingers. Alexis stared out the window silent, but not distant. Jack drove hands steady on the wheel, eyes fixed on the open road. "You okay?" he asked. Alexis nodded. "I'm just preparing." "For what?" "For the possibility that there are no answers. No perfect closure. Just an ending that comes too late." Jack nodded. "Then maybe don't look for answers," he said. "Just look her in the eyes and show her the woman she missed out on." The hospice was nestled in a quiet Oregon valley surrounded by pine trees and soft fog. They didn't speak much on the way in. The nurse led them to a small room where an old woman lay sleeping, frail, almost translucent like the echo of a life too long exiled from love. Alexis stood frozen in the doorway. Jack touched her shoulder. "You don't have to go in." She shook her head. "No, I do." She stepped inside. Her mother stirred. Eyes fluttered open. For a moment, silence ruled. Then the woman whispered, "You came." Alexis swallowed hard. "I got your letter." Tears pooled in the woman's eyes. "I didn't know how to be a mother," she rasped, "especially not to someone as brilliant and bright as you." "I was afraid." Alexis knelt beside the bed. "I spent years trying to hate you," she said, "but it never quite stuck. I just wanted to know if I was ever enough." Her mother reached a trembling hand to touch her face. "You were too much. And that was my failure. Not yours." "Then say it," Alexis whispered. "Say you loved me. Even if it was broken." Her mother's voice cracked. "I loved you every day I stayed away, because I believed you were safer without me. But I was wrong." Alexis closed her eyes. And for a long moment, no titles, no armor, no legacy, just a daughter holding her mother's hand while time slipped through their fingers. That night, Alexis sat on the front porch of the hospice wrapped in Jack's coat. Lily was asleep again, safe inside. Jack joined her with 2 mugs of tea. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Empty. but somehow lighter. She looked at him, her voice gentler now. I think I've spent my whole life waiting for someone to choose me, not out of guilt or expectation, but because they wanted to. Jack reached out, took her hand. I'm not here because I pity you. Then why are you here? He met her eyes. Because loving you feels like coming home to the part of myself I thought was lost forever. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up. Then stay. Jack didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply leaned in, not rushed, not scripted, and kissed her with the kind of tenderness that doesn't come from passion alone, but from presence. And in that kiss, Alexis didn't feel conquered. She felt chosen. There's a strange quiet that settles after a storm, not peace exactly, but the stillness of a heart learning how to beat again. That's how it felt when they returned to New York. The city hadn't changed, but something inside Jack and Alexis had. They moved differently now with intention. Less armor, more presence. Jack walked into Thorn Global's lobby holding Lily's hand, both of them laughing at a joke no one else would understand. Alexis was already there, waiting by the elevator, smiling before she even turned around. You're late, she said with mock sternness. Jack grinned. We stopped for waffles. Waffles don't care about time. Lily raised her hand proudly. I ate 3. Alexis laughed, the sound rich and real. Well, that settles it. You're clearly the CEO of breakfast. The elevator chimed open. They stepped in 3 people who just months ago were strangers orbiting different wounds. Now they were gravity to one another. But no good story ends without a final test. And that test arrived 3 days later, wrapped in a manila envelope and delivered by a courier with trembling hands. Jack was in the break room when Natalie approached. There's something you should see, she said. He opened the envelope slowly, unsure of what waited inside. It was a legal notice from Lily's maternal grandparents, petitioning for full custody. The room spun just slightly. Alexis appeared in the doorway a few moments later, as if drawn by instinct alone. Jack. He handed her the papers without a word. She read them in silence, her expression tightening. They waited all this time, she murmured, and now they want her back. Jack nodded. I haven't heard from them in years. Not one call. Not one birthday card. He dropped into a chair, his voice cracking. They're claiming I'm unfit. That Lily's living situation is unstable. They're using my job history, the fact that I didn't go to college, and... He hesitated. They mentioned you. Alexis blinked. Me. They're implying Lily's being raised in a morally ambiguous household, that our relationship compromises her safety. Silence fell thick and sharp. Then Alexis straightened her shoulders. Then we fight. Jack looked up weary. You don't have to get involved. Yes, she said firmly, I do. He shook his head. I don't want you dragged into my mess, Alexis. Jack, she said, kneeling in front of him, eyes fierce. You are not a mess. You are a man who has done everything to protect his daughter. If this system can't see that, then we'll show them. He looked down at her hand, strong, steady, holding his. I don't want to lose her, he whispered. You won't, she said. Not while I'm breathing. The hearing was set within a week. Alexis hired the best family attorney in New York, not because she had to, but because Jack and Lily were hers now. Chosen, not claimed. The courtroom was cold, dressed in wood and silence. Jack wore his only suit. Alexis sat beside him, composed but burning with resolve. Across from them sat Lily's grandparents, well-dressed, distant. They barely looked at Jack. When they did, it was with disdain wrapped in pity. The judge entered. Formalities followed. Then came the testimony. Jack stood first. He spoke simply, plainly. Your Honor, I don't have a mansion. I don't have degrees on my wall, but I have love. Every single day I show up for Lily. I pack her lunch. I braid her hair badly. I walk her to school and I read to her at night. I see her, and I don't think that's something money can measure." There was a pause. Then Alexis was called. She rose, calm and graceful, but when she took the stand, her voice didn't carry boardroom polish, it carried something far more powerful. "Truth. I'm Alexis Thorne, CEO of Thorne Global. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here as someone who has watched Jack Rourke love his daughter with more depth and gentleness than I've seen in most families combined." She looked directly at the judge. "Lily is thriving. She's safe. She's loved. And what's more, she's happy. If that's not the definition of a fit parent, then maybe the system is broken, not Jack." Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Then Lily herself was brought in, a quiet girl with fire in her little heart. The judge bent down and asked Lily, "Who do you want to live with?" Lily looked at her father, then at Alexis, and then she said loud and clear, "With my daddy, and Miss Alexis too, because they see me, not like a thing to win, but like a person." Her voice trembled. "And I don't want to be a prize. I want to be a kid." The judge nodded slowly, then spoke the words that cracked the silence. "Custody remains with Mr. Rourke. Motion to remove denied." Relief collapsed into Jack like a wave. He didn't cry, but Alexis saw the war leave his shoulders. That night, back at her apartment, Lily fast asleep in the other room, Alexis poured 2 glasses of wine. Jack stood on the balcony watching the city breathe. She joined him. "You held it together," she said softly. He exhaled. "I was scared out of my mind. You didn't show it." He looked at her now, eyes steady. "That's because you were beside me." She smiled. "Always will be." "Why?" he asked. She stepped closer. "Because the world tried to tell both of us we weren't worthy of love, of family, of peace. And we proved it wrong." She placed the glass in his hand. "To truth," she said. He clinked his glass gently against hers. "To second chances." And in that clinking, in that quiet triumph, 2 souls who had once been buried by shame, by silence, by circumstance, stood tall in the light they had built together. Not perfectly, but wholly. Spring arrived, not with a shout, but with a quiet unfolding. Cherry blossoms scattered across sidewalks like confetti from the sky. The wind carried warmth again, the kind that made strangers smile and children chase it like a secret. New York was waking up. And in a quiet brownstone just off Riverside, something even rarer was happening. A family was learning how to stay. The morning began with laughter in the kitchen. Not the loud, careless kind, but the soft, full kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're meant to be. Lily stood on a stool, holding a whisk like it was a magic wand. "I declare this pancake royally perfect," she announced, flipping it onto a plate with dramatic flair. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Is it edible this time?" "Define edible?" She grinned. From across the room, Alexis laughed. She was wearing jeans, barefoot, her hair in a loose braid, the most powerful woman in a skyscraper city, now happy to rule from a kitchen island. "You two are dangerous together," she said, sipping coffee. Jack leaned in. Only when unsupervised. Lily pointed at both of them. "Today's a big day. You guys promised." Jack and Alexis exchanged a look. "We remember," Jack said. "How could we forget?" Alexis added. It was the day they'd been planning for months, not a wedding, not a merger, not a grand gesture, but something smaller, deeper. A vow to begin. The ceremony was held at the community garden Jack had once helped rebuild in his spare time. It wasn't much, just a patch of green, carved from concrete lined with wildflowers benches, and a stubborn old oak that had survived 3 hurricanes. But, to them, it was perfect. Natalie was there, holding back tears. Mr. Leland from the board had come surprisingly emotional. Even a few former janitorial staff, now full employees under Alexis's new policy, showed up in pressed shirts and proud smiles. There were no tuxedos, just sunlight. No aisle, just steps toward one another. Lily stood between them holding a book of handwritten vows. "Ready," she whispered. Jack nodded. Alexis smiled. Let's do this." Lily opened the book, cleared her throat dramatically, and began. "These are not wedding vows," she said. "These are forever promises." The crowd chuckled, and Alexis wiped a tear from her eye. Jack began. "Alexis," he said, voice steady. "I promise to never let your strength become a reason for me to step back, but a reason to step with you. I promise to laugh when life is heavy, and to hold space when silence is needed. I promise to build a home with you, not in walls, but in words, and in the little choices we make every day to stay." The garden was quiet, save for the wind in the trees. Then Alexis spoke. "Jack, I used to believe love had to be earned, that I had to prove my worth before I could rest in someone's arms. But you showed me love isn't earned. It's recognized. It's when someone sees every scar and still chooses to stay. I promise to never confuse your gentleness for weakness, and your quiet for absence. I promise to love Lily not as an obligation, but as one of the greatest gifts of my life." Lily sniffled loudly. "Okay, that part got me." Everyone laughed. Alexis turned to Lily and knelt down. "And to you," she said, "I promise to always make space for your voice, your dreams, and your weird pancake experiments." "I'm not weird," Lily whispered. "You're magical," Alexis said. Jack placed his hand on theirs. The three of them stood not as perfect people, but as whole ones. Chosen. Bound not by blood, but by something even stronger in tension. That evening the brownstone was filled with friends and food and candles that flickered long past midnight. On the balcony, Jack and Alexis stood watching the city below. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Remember when I found you cleaning vending machines?" Jack laughed. "Remember when you thought I was stealing? You were unplugging the entire server rack, because someone labeled it wrong." She turned to him, eyes soft. "Thank you for not walking away, even when I didn't deserve your patience." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you for finally believing you were worthy of being loved." A quiet beat passed. Then Alexis asked almost shyly, "Are you happy, Jack?" He looked at her. Really looked. "I'm not just happy. I'm home." Later that night, Lily slipped into their room dragging a blanket behind her. "I had a dream," she said, climbing into bed between them. "What was it about?" Alexis asked, pulling her close. "We were a team. Forever. Like the kind that doesn't break even when it rains." Jack smiled. "Sounds more like a memory than a dream." Lily closed her eyes. "Yeah, maybe it was both." And as the city slept wrapped in its own rhythms, one small family lay in a room of warmth, finally free from waiting, finally full of enough. Years from now, someone would write about Alexis Thorne, the CEO who redefined power with grace, about Jack Rourke, the janitor who reminded the world that brilliance wears boots and humility, and about Lily, the girl who held their hearts together like stitches made of joy. But those stories, they'd only ever be footnotes, because the real story was this. Sometimes love doesn't arrive in fireworks. It arrives in repetition in coffee cups, bedtime stories, hard conversations, and held hands. And, if you're lucky, it stays. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, take a moment. Breathe it in. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about grand victories. They're about quiet resilience, everyday love, and second chances that bloom when no one's looking. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what part of the story stayed with you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey of hope, healing, and humanity. There's so much more to come. From our storytelling family to yours, thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.